What is up, YouTube? Uncommon Ramen here. Before I get into the video, let me remind you that if you like my videos, hit that like and subscribe button. And if you want to be notified when the videos hit the interwebs, please hit the bell icon. And finally, if you feel the need to support me, hit me up on my Patreon at patreon.com/uncommonramen, capital U, capital R. I do all this in my free time, so any amount of support can help me bring more of this content to you more often. All right, today we are going to be taking a look at another deck tech. I was going through all of my commander decks, and I realized that there were still 6 of them that I have not gone through. And I'm imagining by the time I get to next week or the week after that, there will be actually 9 of them. Well, minus this one, so 8 of them. No, 9. I think 9. Anyway, 9 other deck techs that I haven't done, so we have plenty of content to go for this year. Granted, it's coming to an end. Today we are going to take a look at Anje Falconwrath. This was a precon that I upgraded. Anje Falconwrath, and I guess really just Rakdos Madness in general, is kind of not good. In fact, the way to win has absolutely nothing to do so much with Madness as it does with Anje's ability to ditch, or to constantly ditch Madness cards and continue digging through the deck to find the win condition. So what we have here is a commander that says, haste, you can tap it to discard a card and draw a card, and whenever you discard a card, if it has Madness, untap Anje Falconwrath. She's a 1/3 for 1, a black and a red. And so essentially, it is exactly like I said. You want to stack this deck with a ton of cards with Madness, and you just want to continuously tap her and discard cards with Madness to untap her and draw more cards so that you can dig for the cards that you need. Not all of these cards with Madness are actually very good or good for the situation you might be in, so you don't necessarily need to or even want to cast several of these cards that are that have Madness once they have been discarded, but you still will probably cast some of them. So I have chosen to take a different style on doing these deck techs. Instead of showing you creatures, instant, sorcery, artifact, enchantment, planeswalker, lands, I'm going to break it down into types, okay? So the first thing we're going to take a look at is the amount of cards in here with Madness. The cards that I'm going to show you aren't going to include other categories like spot removal and stuff like that. There are other Madness cards that are outside of this Madness category because they actually serve 2 purposes in this deck. So Anje Falconwrath, we're going to be digging for a win condition. So the first thing we're going to look at, like I said, is cards with Madness. So starting with Archfiend of Spite, it is Madness 3 and 2 black, and if your opponent deals combat damage to it, is it combat damage only? No. If your opponent deals damage to it, period, it deals that much damage to your opponent unless they sacrifice cards. So it makes it really hard to touch this guy without them getting hurt in the process. We also have Asylum Visitor. We have, well, I don't want to go into all the abilities in great detail, but at the beginning of each player's upkeep, if that player has no cards in hand, you draw a card and lose a life. So it's kind of a draw card, but likely not to happen. We got Blazing Rootwalla, a very simple 0 Madness cost. We have Bloodhall Priest, which also punishes people. Whenever Bloodhall Priest enters the battlefield or attacks, if I have no cards in hand, Bloodhall Priest deals 2 damage to any target. Also less likely to happen, although it could happen. We have Vampire. We have Gorgon Recluse. We have Grave Scrabbler to get back things. We have Incorrigible Youths. Kitchen Imp. Muckdrub to help soak spell targets. Got Necrogoyf because he can get massive, and this is a really great card in here with Madness of 1 and 2 black. This guy can be a real problem on the table. We got Reckless Worm. Revolutionist. When it enters the battlefield, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to hand. That can help you bring back your win condition should you need to recast it. Got Shadowgrange Archfiend, another big beater on the table that your opponents will have to deal with. Stormkirk Occultist. Twins of Maurer Estate. Voldaren Pariah. We have Abandon Reason. Fiery Temper for incidental damage. Psychotic Haze. Violent Eruption, also for incidental damage. Alchemist Greeting for the same thing. Alms of the Vein for the same thing. Biting Rain is the only card in here that functions very similar to a board wipe. We have Call to the Netherworld, so we can return some cards. Distemper of the Blood. We have From Under the Floorboards to create a board state, although the board state comes into play tapped. We have Geese's Bidding. Malevolent Whispers. Psychotic Episode. We have Curse of Fool's Wisdom to tax our opponents for drawing cards, or at least one opponent for drawing cards. We got Stenzia Masquerade. And we got Strength of Lunacy. So those are most of the Madness cards. There are still a few more. Amongst all the cards, we're not always going to have Madness cards to discard. So sometimes while you're in the process of discarding, you will end up at some point in time running out of cards to discard with Madness. And you still want to get value off that Anje. So the last card that you can discard is Squee Goblin Nabob. This is great in here because at the beginning of your upkeep, you can return Squee Goblin Nabob from your graveyard to your hand, right? So essentially, once you have exhausted all options of Madness, then once she untaps again, you can tap her and discard this, draw a card, and then start your turn and bring this back to your hand. It's just a really great card in here. This has super high synergy for this, so it should be in the deck. Next, we're going to look at cards that also help us discard. So if you don't have Anje, you're not completely out of luck. We have cards like Chainer, Nightmare Adept. He is 2 a black and a red for a 3/2. You can discard a card from your hand and cast a creature card from your graveyard this turn, and you can only activate that ability once per turn. So we can get the Madness value for cards because typically speaking, Madness value is cheaper. And then we also get to reanimate something. And then whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if you didn't cast it from your hand, it gains haste until your next turn. So those things will come into play with haste, so they can become an instant threat if necessary. Next up, we have Hellmongrel. This one also helps us discard cards, but also it's got Madness. So this can be discarded via Anje and then put into play. And then if something happens to Anje, or if something is about to happen to the Mongrel, you can discard cards to pump up the Mongrel. Next up, we have Jaxis the Troublemaker. For 1 red, you can tap it to discard a card and create a token that's a copy of another target creature you control. It gains haste, and when this creature dies, you get to draw a card and then sacrifice it at the beginning of next end step. So again, it's one of those things where you get to use it once per turn, but you get some weird value out of it. You get to discard a card, and you also get to draw a card. So it just outright is a very cool card in this deck. Then we have Anya's Ravager. This is another instance of a card that has you discard but also has Madness. It has to attack each combat if able, and when it attacks, you can discard a card from your hand. When it attacks, you can discard your hand and draw 3 cards. This can be actually really beneficial if you're stuck, and especially if you have less than 3 cards in your hand. And especially, again, if the cards in your hand either are Squee or have Madness. Next up, we have Grimoire of the Dead, another way to discard cards. It's also only once per turn, but for 1, you can tap it to discard a card to put a study counter on Grimoire. And then you can tap Grimoire and remove 3 study counters from it, and then sacrifice Grimoire to put all creature cards from all graveyards onto the battlefield under your control. And they're all black zombies in addition to the other types. This is super cool because this can actually be a win condition for the deck. The unfortunate part is that it's only once per turn, so it takes 3 turns to get those counters on it. That being said, if it does pop off, you probably will end up winning the game at that point. So those are cards that will help you discard cards. We also have cards in here that benefit from cards being discarded. Okay, so you need to have you're not going to be able to fill this out, or I guess I should say you shouldn't fill this out with just madness cards, because like I said, Rakdos madness cards kind of lean on the side of not so effectual in a commander game. So you're also going to want to put synergies in there that benefit from cards being discarded. We start here with Bone Miser. Whenever you discard a creature card, you get a 2/2 zombie. Whenever you discard a land card, you get 2 black mana. And whenever you discard a non-creature, non-land card, you get to draw a card. So if Anje's dead and you're relying on something like the Hellmongrel, Hellmongrel plus Bone Miser helps you get a whole bunch of really good options from discarding. Next, we have Containment Construct. As I mentioned before, not every card in here has Madness, so having a Containment Construct to catch all those cards that you discard that don't have Madness and get those into play as if they had Madness is actually a really cool thing. This helps you to be able to discard some of those cards that aren't necessarily squee. Next up, we have Glinthorn Buccaneer. Glinthorn Buccaneer says whenever you discard a card, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So this can outright start dealing massive amounts of incidental damage, especially if you get a large string of Madness cards and you just keep discarding to deal damage. Next up, we have Surly Badgesaur. This is a lot like Bone Miser, where it sees different card types and gives you a benefit. So if you discard a creature card, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on Surly Badgesaur. If you discard a land card, you get to create a treasure token. And if you discard a non-land, non-creature card, Surly Badgesaur just straight up fights another target. So this can be a really great way of getting some spot removal out there. It benefits from seeing cards being discarded, and it's just an outright really great card for this deck. Next up, we have Dying to Serve. This one's kind of... I would replace this, and I'll explain what I'd replace this with, but for the time being, it sees cards being discarded. If you discard 1 or more cards, you get to create a tapped 2/2 black zombie creature token, but the effect only triggers once per turn. So you're not going to create an army, but you're still going to create at least 1 little blocker. Unfortunately, you don't get to use it until next turn. And then I believe finally what we have in here is Faith of the Devoted, which sees cards being cycled and cards being discarded. So in the land base, we're going to have a couple cards that cycle. Whenever you cycle a card or discard a card, you can pay 1. If you do, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So it's up there with the Glinthorn, except that you have to pay mana every time you do discard. Next up, we're actually going to look at cards that benefit from cards being cast from exile. Cards that have Madness, when they are discarded, they go into exile, giving you an opportunity to play those cards. So we're going to have things like Prosper Tomebound, which says whenever you play a card from exile, you get to create a treasure token. So we get extra benefits from casting our cards with Madness by getting treasure tokens, which helps us buffer our lands, or just buffer our mana in general, so that we can continue casting more of those cards with Madness. Because in the perfect world, not only do we want to discard the cards with Madness, but we'd also kind of like to play some or all of those. And then finally, we also have Passionate Archaeologist, which gives your commander an ability that says whenever you cast a spell from exile, this creature deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to target opponent. And this is fantastic because most Madness cards have outrageously large costs because their Madness cost is outrageously low. So this is a great way to deal a lot of incidental damage. It's like having a Warstorm Surge specifically for Madness. Next, we're going to look at other win conditions in this deck. One of these has Madness right here with Avacyn's Judgment. If you cast this for its Madness cost, it deals X damage divided as you choose among permanents and or players. So the idea here is to try and get enough damage to split it between 3 players and kill them. And I will show you the way to do that with cards that I will be adding to this, because without those cards, there's kind of not really a way to win with this deck. Avacyn's Judgment, if enough incidental damage has been thrown around, will kill at least 1, maybe 2 opponents. So that's something you can kind of lean on. But that's more of a late game strategy, and that's assuming that Anje lives long enough to be part of a late game strategy. Next up, we have Cut to Ribbons. Cut is incidental damage. I guess to creatures actually. Ribbons is what you're trying to cast this for, which is X and 2 black. Each opponent loses X life. And again, it's meant to be a win condition. With the current build, it looks for a late game. But with the proper build, which I again will show you after we get through the deck tech here, will do it pretty much instantly. Next, we're going to take a look at the removal suite in here, starting with Big Game Hunter. A lot of the cards in the removal suite also have Madness, so it gives you an opportunity to cast these for much less than they would have normally been cast for. Big Game Hunter sees creatures with power 4 or greater. We also have Nightshade Assassin. This is great in early game when you have a big hand. As it gets later in the game and you start running lower on cards, this is going to become less effective. But basically, when it's played, you get to reveal X black cards from your hand and give target creature -X/-X. So a nice little removal there that also gets around indestructible. We also have Chaos Warp. This is a pretty simple red. Get something off the table and possibly put something else in play. We have Dark Withering, destroy target non-black creature, Madness. We have Deadly Rollick, which if your commander is in play is absolutely free. Otherwise, for 3 and a black, exile target creature, which again also gets around. Indestructible. We have Tybalt's Trickery to help counter things. It's the only counter spell in here. And it's also one of those cards that I may or may not remove just because there's 3 cards that need to go in here. Next up, we have Feed the Swarm. Destroy target creature or enchantment and then lose 2 life. So very good, very versatile. We also have Ichor Slick, which sees a creature getting -3/-3. While it only kills small creatures, it does get around indestructible. So it's just a nice card to have in here. We also have Murderous Compulsion, destroy target tapped creature. Again, it's conditional, but at least we get to destroy something. And then finally, we have Terminal Agony, which is just destroy target creature, and for its Madness costs the same thing as Terminate. Last, we're going to look at cards that are just added in here because we had the space to do so, starting with Dark Ritual because it's just a freaking good card. We also have Beacon of Unrest to help bring back cards from the graveyard. Most importantly, we can start bringing back cards from our opponent's graveyards that might be big and help us stay alive. This continuously gets shuffled back into your deck, so you're likely to draw it a couple of times, especially if you're using Anje the proper way of just discarding a whole bunch of Madness cards and drawing. And then finally, we have Faithless Looting to help us draw cards. Obviously, we also have to discard cards, which in this deck is fantastic because again, they will have Madness, or most likely will have Madness. It also has Flashback. The last parts here are going to be the Mana Rocks, followed by the lands. We have ourselves an Arcane Signet, a Headrun Archive, a Rakdos Signet, a Soul Ring, and a Talisman of Indulgence. And then finally, our lands will consist of... Oh, that was interesting. We have Ash Barrens, Barren Moor, which cycles, Blood Crypt, Bloodfell Caves, which you can switch with Geothermal Vents. Command Tower, Drownyard Temple, which also helps us... which also comes back from the graveyard. This is one of those things that is pretty similar to Squee in the sense that you can choose to discard this, then pay the 3 to return to the battlefield tapped, just in case you need that extra card draw. We have Evolving Wilds, we have Exotic Orchard, Foreboding Ruins, Forgotten Cave, another cycling. We have Gyre Reach Sanitarium. Each player draws a card, then discards a card. Again, I'm not worried about my opponents drawing cards. I just want to be able to draw cards and also discard cards, so this sees both. We have Haunted Ridge, Myriad Landscape, Rakdos Carnarium, Rixmati Dungeon Palace. Each player discards a card. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. Again, just another way to discard cards. We have Smoldering Marsh. Then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 mountains, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 swamps. There are only, I think, 5 rocks and 32 lands in here, because the concept here is that you are going to be digging so deep that you should not miss a land drop. And yes, that's putting a lot of faith into the deck, and I apologize. Like, you should probably build your own version of this. I have had no problems with mana base with this deck, probably because, again, you're digging so deep with it. As long as you can get 3 onto the table and get Anje into play, you generally stop having to worry about mana at that point. Now, finally, there are some updates that you need to do to this deck in order for it to actually be anywhere near useful. I've played this deck in this version multiple times, and while adding things like Prosper Tomebound and the Archaeologist and all that stuff does help get a lot of incidental damage into there, I have found myself on multiple occasions just not being able to close out the game because I don't have what I need. And while, again, the Grimoire is a great way to make a threat that you're going to close out the game, the reality is that before it has a chance to get activated, most players have what they need to destroy it. So you end up just outright losing that game. So some cards that you should be adding in here are cards like Animate Dead, Necromancy, and Dance of the Dead. And the reason that you want to add these in, because these seem like very random cards that you'd be adding in here, is because you should also be adding in a card called World Gorger Dragon. When it comes into play, it removes all of your permanents from the game, and this actually sets you up for an infinite combo. All of the cards that I just mentioned in the form of Animate Dead, Necromancy, and Dance of the Dead all reanimate a creature from the graveyard, but they have a caveat in that if any of them are removed from the game in any way, you have to sacrifice the creature that was animated by them, okay? So if you use Dance of the Dead, Necromancy, and Animate Dead to animate World Gorger Dragon, when World Gorger Dragon comes into play, it removes all of your permanents from the game, including the Animate Dead, Necromancy, or Dance of the Dead, forcing you to sacrifice the World Gorger Dragon. When the World Gorger Dragon is put into your graveyard, or just leaves play, you get to return all of the cards that were removed from the game back to the battlefield. That includes your lands, and when they get returned to the battlefield, they get returned untapped. So essentially what ends up happening is a loop. You'll play the Animate Dead. First, you'll tap all your lands, float any mana, play the Animate Dead, reanimate the World Gorger Dragon. World Gorger Dragon comes into play and removes everything, including the Animate Dead, from the game. The World Gorger Dragon dies. All of your stuff that was removed from the game returns back to the game untapped, including your Animate Dead. So your Animate Dead now needs to seek a new target. It targets World Gorger Dragon. You hold priority as it's targeting to tap all your lands and float the mana. You return the World Gorger Dragon. It removes everything, including the Animate Dead. It dies again. It returns everything, including your lands, untapped. And then the Animate Dead needs to seek a target. And you just do that over and over again until you have infinite colored mana. And then you dump that infinite colored mana into an Avacyn's Judgment or a Cut to Ribbons and win the game, basically. And that is kind of the only thing you can do. So essentially, the way this deck ends up running is that you dig as deep as you can to get your World Gorger Dragon into your graveyard and to get one of your animate effects into your hand. Then you start the infinite loop combo, and then you play one of your X spells to kill everyone. So that is the Anje deck tech. Again, you should probably look into those 3 cards. I would probably take out the Dying to Serve, as well as I can't remember what the other card was for those enchantments, and then find a creature that you don't necessarily need so you can take it out to put in World Gorger Dragon. If you have any questions or comments, leave those down below, but let's keep it positive. I will be removing any negative comments. And that's it, guys. Until next time. Peace.